tough questions, new insights, diverse perspectives. Welcome to Questions of the Day with Fanuel Muindi.
Welcome to Questions of the Day. My name is Fanuel Muindi. Now, science museums play a critical role in civic science. A question that one could ask is, what is their state, for example, in countries like Mexico? Well, that is the question our SciTV analyst, Gracia, has been looking at for quite some time. And so she joined me recently to talk about her work. Have a listen. Gracia, thank you so much for stopping by.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today here.
And so, Gracia, I just want to start high level. Tell us what got you interested in science museums in Mexico?
Yeah, so the first time that I got interested into science museums, it was because I'm from Tlaxcala. It is the smallest state in Mexico, and in my state, there was no science museum there. So I first got interested because I wanted to know if that was similar in other states, because I knew that in Mexico City there were tons of them. So I was interested in knowing if there were underserved regions or if it was similar in other states.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you were looking at was the data that these science museums were putting out, or at least the Mexican government or other entities were collecting. Tell us about that, the data part of this.
Yeah, of course. So when I got interested into that, I started to do like a search, and I found that the Mexican government does like some statistics regarding the science museums in Mexico, but they are like just published in raw data, and they are pretty interesting. They are pretty complete, but they are in raw data.
Yeah, and in fact, we have a couple of those links in the description below for those who are interested to go and explore those data. And so, what type of data were you finding in your analysis?
Yeah, so as I said, it is like raw data, but it is pretty complete. Like the statistics that they show are like complete. They talk about the size of the museum, like if they're big or just small, the number of visitants, the number of workers. Also, they say like how many museums are per state. So it's like a pretty complete information. It is just that it's not well organized, or it is like really complex to understand. And also there are like some pretty interesting data, like for example the level of education of the visitants or the level of education of the workers. So it's pretty interesting. It's just that it is sometimes a little complex to understand since it is in a raw form.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the data is all there. It's just relatively inaccessible, right? And so what have you been doing with the data to make it more accessible?
Yeah, exactly. Like in order to understand all that data, you have to go and read manuals that they also publish, because the data is also like has a code of each of the questions, and it is like codified in numbers, so you have to understand their codes in order to kind of translate it and have the information. So what we've been working on is that we're creating a dashboard that makes it more accessible and more understandable in order to make it accessible to everybody who wants to know more about it. Like for example, I don't know, politicians who would like to understand more about it, or science communicators that want to understand their environment, or science museums that just want to know more about the environment they are in.
Yeah, but I understand that you've actually talked to some of these science museum leaders, and they welcome this approach, right? This dashboard. What are they telling you?
Yeah, so they what they've told me is that that information is inaccessible to them. Like they don't really pay attention into that, but that it would be super interesting to know it, to know their target public, to know more about this environment so they can improve and they can do things better. And
yeah. I think that's part of the reason it'll be useful for the in talking to the stakeholders, understanding what their needs are. They want this information to be available to them much more easily. So you mentioned what the data includes, right? The participants, who they are, who are going into these museums, and in fact, you had developed an initial kind of a live view, right, of the museums that are actually being created and some that are going away. So I think, can you talk more about this idea that not all the science museums, because we tend to think of science museums, they're creative and they're there for a really long time, but actually you're finding they're pop-ups, they come online and go offline, right? And the data is showing that. Tell us about that, and what's your take?
Yeah, it was pretty shocking for me to know that there were some museums in Mexico that they just like open at the beginning, for example, of the year, and then they close forever. Like you never see them again in the next years. So it was pretty shocking for me to know that those museums are not like there to provide that valuable, I don't know, like valuable information or valuable, I don't know, that they are not they are not there anymore. So yeah, it was pretty shocking.
Yeah, and so do you think that is the case, that these are pop-up museum, that they are just created for a limited amount of time, or is it there's something else, that they were created for a long-term vision, but then something happened and they shut down? Which way do you think?
I think they're created to be there for more than 1 year at least, but they just closed because sometimes the museums do not understand their environment. So, for example, they are envisioned to stay longer, but just they don't get probably the funding, or probably not many people visit them because they don't know they exist. So they end up closing because they don't have enough funding or enough people that visit them.
Yeah, and so, and Gracia, I know you are actively still looking at the landscape, right? You're tracking, you're talking with these leaders of science museums. So we're going to have you back for sure. Well, what's the future of this work? I know you mentioned that there's a dashboard showing this data that will be released. What other questions do you hope to continue to investigate in the coming months and years?
Yeah, so right now what I would love to do is to approach to more science museums in order to know what they are really interested in, what are they interested in, because as I said, the database is immense. So it would be like maybe no sense to work with all the information. So probably what I will do is to continue talking with them in order to see which information is valuable for them, and make it like a more specific, make the dashboard more specific to their necessities.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, we had a guest a couple of weeks ago from Colombia, actually, one of the science museums there, and they were actually mentioning about releasing new programs within the museum, right? So I anticipate that as you talked with some of these museums in Mexico, you'll get an insight into new things that are happening down there that we would love to learn more about right here on Sci TV. And so, Gracia, this was brief, but I hope that those who are watching will keep a tab on you, will keep this developing story that you're tracking for us. Really appreciate it, Gracia.
Yeah, thanks. And if they're interested, send us a message.
Absolutely. Okay, wonderful. We'll see you soon.